What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Town Politics. So excited to get this episode started. But remember, we're bringing everyone together, activists, journalists, and organizers, community members, to have conversations about Oakland politics. And I'm your host, Pecolia, and
Chaney.
And we're here with Vanessa, Riles, Valarie, Bachelor. Today, we've been talking about a lot of different things, but we got to dive a little bit deeper into housing, particularly here in Oakland, and how this darn crisis began, who it affects, and what we must do to resolve it, especially around policy choices of the city and certain elected officials. We'll probably names drop some people. In this episode, we're going to be talking about some big terms like gentrification. We're going to be talking about displacement, particularly in East and West Oakland. What does that mean? What are those terms really mean for us and how we're defining them? We're going to talk about some historic divestment in Black and brown Oakland neighborhoods. We're going to talk about homelessness in Oakland. We're going to be talking about housing problems. And we're going to talk about the solutions to those problems, because we don't just talk about the problems, but we also have solutions. So why don't we have our guests introduce themselves, starting with you, Vanessa?
Thank you so much, Pecolia. My name is Vanessa Riles, and I'm an Oakland native and resident. I currently work for East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, eBase, and I'm particularly working around land justice and ensuring that people have a say in what happens in their own neighborhoods.
Hi, everybody. I'm Valarie Bachelor. I am the director of ACE Oakland. We're a nonprofit community organization that works with and organizes with low-income people of color all over Oakland around issues that they care about. And because of everything that you just mentioned, housing is a huge issue that we organize around, because you cannot really have a stable home if you do not have a place to live, right? And so a lot of members of our community have been organizing for years, and we're building on that organizing, but we still got some more organizing to do.
Fantastic. Well, glad to have you both on. Looking forward to us getting into the convo.
Yes, let's dive deep into this convo. And so the word gentrification, is used a lot in Oakland, especially over the last 15 years or so. Many of us have experienced gentrification and displacement. Myself, I was, displaced up until about 7 years ago, and I'm someone who's an Oakland native. And so, from your own personal and lived experiences in the work that you do, can you define for people who might, for the first time hearing this word, gentrification, what that really means? And we start off with you, Valarie, with your work in ACE.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you all do a lot of work around gentrification and displacement.
Yeah, so I think to me, when I think of gentrification, I think of privilege, right? It's folks of privilege coming to our community and drastically changing what that community looks like to benefit their experience of what they want that community to look like. And so the ways in which we've seen that is, look at downtown. There are more high rises, more luxury apartment buildings downtown than there are places for our folks to be, right? I actually work downtown, and there was a Smart and Final. That's gone now, right? Now I think it's a Sweet Green. Again, where are folks in our community supposed to go now who live downtown, who've traditionally lived downtown, who went to that Smart and Final? Where are they going to go to get groceries? And so as folks are moving in that have these different ways of thinking about how our community should function, they're drastically changing it for the folks that have lived here and have traditionally been a part of our community. And that causes negative experiences for both folks that are here, folks that want to come here, and for folks that, again, are people of low income in our community.
Yeah, I think similarly about gentrification. The word gentrification itself has gentry in it. And back in the old days, the gentry were the people who were people of means, who owned land, who had property. So it's like we're taking a community, and instead of maintaining that community and trying to support it, we're going to whitewash it, let's call it that, because that's what it is a lot of the times, and especially neighborhoods that are primarily Black and brown neighborhoods where white people with money come in
and buy up all the land. And then they're going to try to live the way they want to live and not have an understanding of how people have been living there already for generations.
Mhm.
I think it's really important to say too that this is a systemic thing. This is not something that just happens naturally. People just happen to want to move into a certain neighborhood. It's happening specifically because we have had politicians, especially in Oakland, where we can go back to Jerry Brown or Libby Schaaf, who are specifically courting developers to come in to specific neighborhoods to gentrify them, to the development there that they already know is going to displace existing neighbors. And a big piece of what happens with gentrification, it may start small, but then the rents all around begin to rise because other landowners in that same space will understand that they now have the opportunity to hike up their rents and their prices so that not only do people get pushed out of their homes, but also businesses and nonprofit organizations are getting pushed out and gentrified out of neighborhoods where they have historically been.
Mhm.
I appreciate you bringing in the frame that this is not just about migration, because I think sometimes people conflate gentrification with migration. Well, oh, it's just, people move where they can afford. And I'm like, nah, let's dig a little bit deeper in that, particularly for like West Oakland, right? Like folks left the city to move to West Oakland because they could get those Victorians back in the day for really cheap, fix them up and save. And they felt like that was a wiser investment than staying in San Francisco, where they would have to pay a little bit more. And so I remember the first time I had a person I knew who did that, and they were white and they had means and had the means to do that and could get a not only a mortgage but a construction rehab loan, right? Who does that these days? You can't get two loans at once, right? But that's what they did. And they gentrified the lower bottoms. And I was like, dang, this is hella deep, right? And they knew they were. They knew. And so it wasn't just about them. They could have afforded to live in San Francisco and buy a house in San Francisco, but they actively chose to go into West Oakland. So I think the choice is important to highlight. And then also the migration story of California, which is a very beautiful story, right? We want folks to be able to move through communities, but we want them to be able to make choice in that, right? Whereas gentrification takes away the choice, particularly of folks of lower income, to be able to make that decision for themselves. So appreciate you highlighting the class piece around that. I guess my question, like, you mentioned Jerry Brown, you mentioned Libby, so we got to talk about it, right? Like, what has displacement looked like? They're just two politicians in a long history of displacement, particularly for West Oakland, which has a significant amount of history. We look at that post office and we don't realize that post office stands on, a whole community that used to exist there. The freeways have a horrible history in Oakland. So, what's the history that you can highlight for us of like how displacement has been weaponized, particularly here in Oakland?
I think that in West Oakland, especially, is a sad story because during the migration from the South of Black folks to California and out of the worst possible situations they could find, they were able to find jobs here. They were able to be working on the railroad and working at the Port of Oakland and West Oakland with Esther's Orbit Room and other. It was a thriving place of business. It was like a Black Mecca. It was like Harlem of the West. People were thriving and having lives and businesses, and it has systematically been torn down and taken away through gentrification and displacement, through the creation of the freeways that have taken so many people's homes. I mean, just in so many ways destroyed a lot of the community of West Oakland. And then we think about even after that, the history of West Oakland, of the Black Panthers, and so much movement and beauty has been in that space. And now it has changed a lot. There are beautiful murals there talking about the history that was there and what it used to be like, but it's not the same. And we're lucky now to have some organizations like EB-PREC and others that are trying to revitalize these areas and bring back this feeling of actual community for especially for folks of color, Black folks and poor folks who have lived there. But the systemic damage that has been done is so obvious as you drive down those streets and really experience what it feels like there.
And it's deep too, because most of the freeway, the post office, and for those who don't know the geography of Oakland, they built two freeways to go through West Oakland, right? So we have 880 that goes from the bridge to the 880 corridor down south to San Jose. But then there was also 980 built, which connects 580 and 880 together, right?
Right. And,
And
the Cypress.
and the
The
Cypress, thank you.
Cypress that no longer there.
Exactly. And so, there was this term that we, in San Francisco, I grew up in San Francisco, used eminent domain. And I think we know the story of the Fillmore so well.
Mhm.
The government came in and said, hey, we're going to take your property. We're going to give you pennies on the dollar for the value of it. And we're going to use this property to build freeways and other things. Same thing happened in West Oakland. Eminent domain was declared. And I remember talking to this elder who was like, yo, the post office in that whole area before the port used to be a thriving, not only Black community, but there were churches, there were grocery stores, there were schools. And I'm like, to this day, still trying to get people to be like, what were the name of the schools? Because that's some history that we should probably know, right? But when we say that West Oakland was the Harlem of the West, people can't imagine it because all they see is a post office and the freeways. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, yeah, the post office, the BART, all of
Right.
that was what they put in place after they eminent domain. They literally took people's property and told them, bye, you got to go. And here's pennies on the dollar for it. We talk about it as just being Black folks, but it wasn't just Black folks, right? It was a huge immigrant community as well. It was actually one of the most diverse Black and brown communities in the country. So I'm curious, Valarie, if you can bring in the lens of like how that has impacted immigration and the ability of immigrant families to have safety in Oakland.
Yeah, I think that's really important because a lot of folks, when we think about gentrification, there's a lot of like, well, I'm from Oakland, I've lived in Oakland. And I think that again comes from the fight around gentrification. But then immigrants hear that as in like, you are not welcomed here, right? Like you are not from here. And I think we have such a diverse history of migration in our community that is not the sentiment that we want to put forth, right? We had like the reason we have a Chinatown is because we had a thriving Chinese community here as well, right? We have we had a amazing organized Black community, right, with the Black Panthers and other organizations. And, the Fruitvale area and other areas have had a lot of organizing as well within the Latino community. And now we're seeing Mayan Mum folks in the community. And a lot of it, they just, put people together, right? It's like all Latinos and it's very clear differences around language, around customs and culture. But it doesn't end there. We have an Ethiopian community that's thriving in our city, right? We have a Yemeni and Arab community that's also really thriving in our city. And so what are some of the things that we can do to uplift what we're doing as a city and to make it so that everyone in our community can stay in our community and thrive, right? One of our zip codes, I think it's in the Clinton neighborhood, it's the 15th most diverse in the country. And the folks that speak different languages, folks that come from different places. So that is an asset. We need to think about that as an asset instead of like, again, how can we stem the migration that's happening? I also think of it as like the moment we're living in right now, where trans folks are being attacked, where other communities of color are being attacked. Folks are, Social Security, Medicare, all of those things are being cut. We as California and really I think Oakland are being seen as places where folks can move and be safe, right? So we need to ensure that that's real, that that's true for our community that's currently here, but also for anyone that has to come here. Because to me, the difference really between gentrification and migration is most folks that migrate, it is a survival tactic.
Absolutely.
It is because they can no longer stay in their homes, right? Many folks that I know that moved here were like, I was getting harassed by the cartels, right? We could not find employment in my country, so I came here, right? So I think that's really the major difference. And so how can we make sure that folks that are currently living in our community are honored and supported and stay? But also, how can we make sure that as we have an influx of people for whatever reason coming to our communities, how can they also be welcomed and have safe spaces so that they could also thrive in our community? Because I think our community just really thrives with diversity. And we need to see that as an asset and not a liability.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful transition into the next question. You know, I'm from East Oakland, and East Oakland was a thriving area for working class, right? In labor, we had many factories. My families worked at, many of them, my grandmother worked at the Gerber's factory. My stepdad worked at Mother's Goose in Sunshine. And those factory jobs provided jobs to low income, working class, Black folks, mainly Black men who probably couldn't get jobs other places. And even when the crack epidemic hit, a lot of those people were able to still keep their jobs, which when you're employed, you have housing. And we're in a moment now where the city isn't doing enough. And why isn't the city doing enough to protect working class, low income people to have these jobs? The displacement is coming also from when factories and jobs move out of the city, that leaves a great amount of residents without. And so we're seeing the cycle. I remember when I learned about gentrification, it was through Just Cause. And they're saying it's a 25-year cycle. And we're at that mark now from when gentrification, first hit. And we're seeing the cycle again. And so what can the city do more to protect low income and working class and to keep jobs? Oakland was known as a blue collar city, and we're no longer known as that anymore.
It seems to me like our elected officials have over time consistently chosen that if we want to fix things in Oakland, if we want there to be people with more money, people with more jobs, people that are more supported, instead of figuring out how to get jobs and housing to the people here, we are consistently like, our government is consistently trying to bring in jobs from outside. Let's create housing for people from outside. Let's get people from somewhere else to come live here, and that's going to save Oakland. Instead of actually trying to save the people of Oakland, which would actually change the entire city. And that just continues to happen. I can't tell you why, because I have been in those city council meetings screaming and yelling at those people, trying to figure out, why are you consistently trying to create a city for people that don't exist yet? That we don't know if they're going to come. We don't know if they're going to stay. We don't know what they're going to bring here. Instead of actually trying to focus on, what can we do to help the unhoused? What can we do to help people here that are underhoused? What can we do about the people that don't have employment right now? There's tons of people in Oakland that, instead of being served, are sitting on the sidelines while our city continually tries to say, let's build more luxury housing. Let's bring in housing for people from somewhere else, and then we'll have more housed people here. But what are we actually doing with the folks who are unhoused? Not enough, certainly not enough. Even with the funding that we have started to put towards that, just barely made decisions to start putting money towards that. If that money is used the same way that it always has been, is it actually going to effectively change so that we have less unhoused people on our streets and that they're actually finding shelter and housing? I don't feel secure about that at all, because I feel like, again, the politicians keep doing the same thing over and over. There is no innovation. There is no thinking broadly. There is no trying things that we never had before. I think in order for us to have a different outcome, we have to be trying different tactics, and our city isn't there yet. And because of what's happening in the government federally and on the broad, even globally, there's fear. There's all this fear inside elected officials. We're not going to have any money to try to be progressive. Nobody's going to be behind us if we actually try to do something different. So they're doing even less than they were before in a lot of ways, and really acting out of fear.
Yeah. I think part of it too is like, there's just big money in politics, right? And so when we have, tech bros and Piedmont funding entire campaigns of electeds or their recalls, that sends a huge message to those who are elected that you need to be either in line or you're going to be out. And it shapes the politics that they have, right? If you have to raise a certain amount in order to get elected, you're going to do whatever it takes. You're not going to go after those $10, $15 donations. You're going to go after those 900. Every 900 you can get, that's going to be easier and cheaper for you. So again, it's really those folks that are potentially incentivized through those, through that gentrification, that are going to be the ones that have the loudest voice because they have the biggest pocketbook. And then you have organizations like Empower and other PACs that are becoming more powerful, right? Because they are backing folks that have this neoliberal corporate agenda, that want to continuously see Oakland growing, Oakland, being this pinnacle for all of these other folks that are not even here yet, versus really talking about the things that are going to be helpful to the people that are currently here in Oakland. So money and politics plays a huge role in how we got here. And it needs to be a place where we are looking to make a change and make a difference. I think we had, the freedom dollars, the democracy dollars. That's what they were. I think that is a great idea, and I think we should keep pushing forward with it. But then when we have the federal government imposing all of taking back money, saying that we're not going to get money because we're a sanctuary city, it is then making our politicians fearful of how do we actually then fund some of those things, versus let's think of other ways to have progressive taxes that we can then fund the things that we need, right? So yeah, I think money and politics is a huge piece of that.
Yeah. And I think that, we've talked a lot on prior podcasts about, the role of money in politics episode too. So make sure you check it out if you haven't. But I think one of the things we mentioned was that, this is also them using profits, right? Their profits as corporate real estate and tech bros and, investment firms. And the idea of capitalists is extreme, to then have influence and keep this system that keeps them making the maximum profits going, right? But we also, know that some of their politicians, some of their, minions, for lack of a better word, like Jerry Brown, like Libby, they intentionally use government in a way to roll back a lot of things that progressive did fight for, right? They rolled back affordable housing investments, right? They rolled back permanent supportive housing, right? The idea that, you're not going to be able to go from being unhoused to all of a sudden just having, the ability to be at a market rate level of renting housing, but that there are these steps that need to be in between, right? To recover from being unhoused, right? They also chose luxury housing as their primary investment vehicle and really designed housing, the whole housing agenda from the early 2000s until now to really advance the idea that new residents need to come into Oakland. But I'm curious, right now there's been this narrative that Oakland, um, you know, all of a sudden came to this crisis that that is just in the just post pandemic that housing has been an issue in Oakland. And I'm curious from y'all's perspective, what are the other things that Oakland is actively doing or has actively done, even just from 2020 till now, to really keep advancing the housing crisis?
Well, I would say for sure it's not just something that's happened right now, right? We had a huge foreclosure crisis. When I came in 2012, I was working with a lot of childcare providers, and specifically in Oakland, and door knocking as a union organizer, and I was just floored as to the amount of folks who no longer live there. Who moved to Richmond, moved to Antioch, Vacaville, Stockton, Sacramento. I mean, as far out as you can possibly imagine, because they just couldn't live there anymore. So this has definitely been something that we are seeing in cycles. The COVID pandemic also led to mass displacement, where folks do not even really know their neighbors, are not connected to their neighborhood. And unfortunately, I think all of this ICE enforcement that folks are fearing in our community, and the lack of investment in affordable housing is going to lead to yet another wave of mass displacement in our community. And remind me of your question again.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
And what
So
else?
that's a little bit of the history of it, and I think
Yeah.
what's gonna end up happening in a
Yeah.
little while as well if we don't do something around it.
Yeah, I think it's true. The things that we're doing now in terms of affordable housing, in terms of building luxury, we've been doing this for years and years. So we have created the problem and we're continuing to feed into it. And we're still not shifting focus to stop and say, wait, let's decrease the amount of people going into homelessness. There's
Right.
not a lot of done around prevention of homelessness. There is some, and we've started to try to give people rent so that they can stay in place, and things that have come up mostly since, because of COVID, people figured out, oh, let's keep people in their homes so they don't actually get evicted and displaced in the street when they could be infecting everyone. But then as soon as that was over, it was right back to, it's fine for people to be on the streets. It's fine for us to ignore people who are unhoused. And that's always been the case. I mean, since the 80s, when I think Ronald Reagan closed down mental health facilities and people were pushed out onto the street, we have been ignoring people who were unhoused since then. And we have continued to. And then as the problem continues to grow, we continue to displace more people by building more luxury apartments. The numbers just grow and grow, and we continue to not do anything to prevent it from happening, or even substantially enough to actually bring people off the streets. People are going onto the streets faster than the rate that we can actually house them at this point. So we're not going in the right direction. There's nothing for it to happen other than for it to continue to get worse.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. I think, we have some of the strictest rent control ordinances here in Oakland. The enforcement, though, is thin. There is, I can't tell you how many habitability issues I have seen in these apartment buildings. Literally, like, I have walked into homes and apartment buildings that have like cockroaches and pests everywhere. And it's because the landlords have yet to do anything about it. There's other places that are, one tenant that we're working with right now, her entire building is literally about to fall into a creek. And she has heard nothing from her landlord as to whether or not it's going to get fixed. This landlord owns 15 other properties in Oakland. So you think that they're going to, that maybe just one bad landlord is doing something, but no. We also have tenants now that are getting harassed around their immigration status, actively being asked, do you have papers? Are you legal? And that is unlawful in the state of California. But again, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Rob Bonta's office, right? And again, we are holding him accountable. We want him to do something about this. But at the same time, landlords are being emboldened because there is no enforcement mechanism for the laws that we currently have outside of organizing. Think about that. We have an entire government in the city of Oakland, and there is no enforcement mechanism, a real enforcement mechanism for tenants outside of just direct action organizing.
Right. And that's a lack of permanent, that's a lack of investment, right, by the government. You were going to say something, Chaney?
Oh, I was going to agree with what you were saying. The most vulnerable communities right now that's impacted by predatory landlords are immigrant communities and seniors. We didn't know 25 years ago what the impacts would be when promises were made to bring businesses to Oakland and more housing to Oakland. Downtown was desolate with no business. People blamed crack for businesses, leaving, and communities wanted something better. And Jerry Brown made this promise, but without telling us that those plans did not include us.
That's right.
Right? Did not include people like Vanessa and I, who are lifetime residents of Oakland and whose families have contributed, to building of this city. And now we have a homeless crisis when it's 60% Black people who are living on the pavement. And a lot of those people are seniors. And you have corporate development that's getting all of these tax breaks for building multiple senior units, but the conditions, are horrible. And people continue getting these federal breaks, different stipends, while destroying our community. And we know that there's a certain demographics, and so to even your experience for immigrant Black communities, even disabled communities, how drastic are these impacts to us at this moment?
Oh, they're huge. Like I said, we're also talking to folks at a building that they're, I think it's like a 5 or 6 story building where their elevator has been out for over 2 weeks. They're seniors and folks with disabilities. How are they getting to their medical appointments? How are they getting to go to the grocery store? How are they doing anything that makes them go outside, right? They're literally locked into this building, both because it's an affordable housing complex, so that's the only place they can afford, but they're locked in now to their own apartments because the elevator is out.
Wow.
Right? So even when we house folks sometimes, we also have to make sure whatever housing we are providing actually is comfortable, actually is up to code, actually is equitable to the folks that are living there. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. It's like there's much investment that we're trying to make with Measure W, with other investments, but I'm really skeptical in seeing like, I want to see that actual investment get to the folks that need it the most, right? Vanessa mentioned rental assistance. Last year, 5,000 folks in the city of Oakland were evicted from their homes due to lack of payment of rent. That is just the documented court cases that we know of. We know at ACE that there are a lot more people that self-evict because they're scared. They're like, I'm getting this notice, I have to be out by the 7th. Well, that's a fake notice, or it's not a legal notice, and they just freak out. But they're like, but by the 7th, I don't want the sheriffs to come. I'm worried about what's going to happen to my kids. I have an elder parent that's here. And so it really puts people in a bind when, again, the easiest way to keep folks housed is literally to keep folks housed, right? Is rental assistance, it's legal aid, it's some of these bare bone is a habitability. Taking care of habitability. We have some of those resources, but folks are just so scared and worried. And I think part of what they're scared and worried about is how big the problem is, right? We have this, the city of Oakland has monies from a lead settlement, and we've been trying to get them to use those funds for proactive rental inspections. But I've talked to electeds and they've said, this may lead to mass displacement. How are we going to support those folks in staying housed through the abatement of those buildings?
Wow.
And I'm telling them it is only compounding. We are now having kids in those lead-filled buildings. We have pregnant people in those buildings. We have elders in those buildings. And that condition is not leading them to be safer.
Right.
Your inaction is not leading them to be safer. We are seeing an increase in special education students in the city of Oakland. Why do you think that is, right? We're sitting on this money that we're not even using, and our children are seeing the brunt of that in action from our electeds.
Right. And I think it's important to connect we're talking about housing, but housing is not separate from environment, right? And so the environmental injustices that typically happen because red line communities were targeted for polluters to be basing their corporations as well. Huge issues in Oakland. We had the crematory in East Oakland. We had the cement factory in West Oakland, and the massive pollution that those brought. And then, how that seeps into, buildings and homes, and, and the ways that causes environmental issues, but health issues, right? We know Oakland has significant health inequities, not just related to housing, but just place, right? They're place-based because of the amount of pollution that's allowed to be spewed into communities, especially Black communities and immigrant communities, right? So you know, you gotta say, like, this all sounds hella racist. Like, it just is, like, you gotta say
Ding,
it sounds
ding.
racist, ding, ding, right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, like, it is. And I think that part of the challenge of, like, what it means to say progressives, we need to be electing more progressives, is we need electeds who are committed to being anti-racist. We need electeds who are committed to being, you know, pro-black, not in the sense of, like, everybody got to wear dashiki and an afro for Halloween, but we need people, because you know there's some people think that's just what pro-black mean these days. But we need folks who are going to look at the issues their policies are causing to be anti-black and anti immigrant, right? And really anti-renters, right?
Yeah.
Oakland's 60 something percent mostly renters,
Mhm.
right? So it's this town built on the idea of profit making in the first place. Let's start with that. But I also think, like, you know, so then you have all this stuff displacing folks. We have a huge population of families and community members who cannot find housing. I mean, a 1 bedroom is averaging 2,000 in Oakland. I don't even know what that feels like, because that's just ridiculous to me, right? Most people don't even make 2,000 on minimum wage. So, you know, but you know, let's just keep it real. The majority of unhoused community members are Black, are elders, as Chaney hinted, and families. OUSD is very well versed
Yes.
with understanding how many of our students in the city of Oakland are also living out of cars and living with family members and
At shelters.
shelters, if they're lucky to even get
in
that.
San Francisco. Let's be
Right,
clear.
right.
There's not
Because there's
enough
none
here
in,
Oakland.
in Oakland. But I think also, like, you know, there's these encampments that people, so then people are reclaiming land, because that's what it is. And I'll fight
Yes.
anyone on that. They're reclaiming land that's not being actively used and creating encampment communities for safety.
Right.
Right. And now we have a city policy, which is being amplified and pushed back on even or advanced more because of a federal policy that says if you're unhoused, you're a criminal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So how are these sweeps being violently used to also advance this agenda that if you can't afford market rate, then oh well.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that people who are unhoused have had what little rights we even create for them, which are very few, but we do actually in Oakland have an encampment management policy and an encampment management team. And there was time spent with the homeless advocacy working group to talk about what should plans be? What is a better way to actually service encampments? How can we actually help people move so that they're actually moving into housing? And every single one of those policies gets broken every time they sweep an encampment, every single time. And it doesn't matter, like, we have people show up ahead of time and try to be there with people. And now it's gotten to the point where public works and the city workers are like, we're not even going to go there without police escorts. So now you're bringing in potential police violence and just the threat of police, which is enough for most unhoused people they're already going to be disturbed and upset that you're going to throw away everything that they own and not even offer them a place to go after that. And then after we sweep the encampments and throw away everybody's belongings, then we put up a fence around this little tiny piece of land to say, and now you can't come back. And then what are we surprised then when somebody puts up a tent directly across the street from there?
Right.
And that just becomes the next encampment to be swept on the plan as it grows, as we sweep people out of all the other ones. And we're not offering any solutions. We don't have shelter. We don't have transitional housing. We don't have enough of anything to actually offer people a viable option other than sleeping on the streets. And then we've criminalized that to the point where people have no choices at all at this point.
Yeah, and then we have a bunch of vacant land that we don't do anything with, and we don't hold anybody accountable to, right? I live off of 82nd in East Oakland. There are 3 or 4 plots of land that I can tell you right now, there's no plan. There is nothing there but concrete barriers. There's also, and then folks are criminalized for trying to use that to create a community to provide themselves and their family, their created family and or their blood family, some sort of stability. I think that's part of what we are trying to figure out around housing, that others are trying to figure out, how do we grow? How do we make it bigger? How do we make it better? And we're like, we need to just stabilize.
Yes.
We need to stabilize our community, because our kids cannot go to school if they do not know where they're going to sleep that night, or if they didn't get a good night of sleep. They can't do their work, right? Families can't go into work, right? Or find work sometimes if they do not have that stability of housing. So I think we need to get to the stability part, because to me, that is a stable community, is a healthy, it's a safe community, right? This capitalistic notion of continuous growth is what gets us into these unsafe, unsustainable situations when it comes to housing in our community.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about affordable housing and nonprofit affordable housing developers? As much as we need housing that actually is affordable, another system that is not working well is the system of affordable housing. There are folks who are living in affordable housing who have just as many issues and with where they live, with habitability, with not being able to be in contact with who's actually in charge of where they live, people getting displaced and pushed out for a variety of reasons. So affordable housing isn't the answer either. We need to be looking beyond. We need to be thinking about social housing and even beyond that, where people actually have some governance of their own homes, where people can actually live with dignity and have a say in how they live, how they are living. Until we have that, we're going to just be putting people back into these same situations over and over again. And I also want to just say something to the piece you said about the environment. Like when we create affordable housing, we're using our cheapest materials. We're using the things that are the most toxic. We are not creating housing the same, like for people to be able to live with dignity and health and any sense of self, and like being able to actually have sanctuary in your home. Everybody should be able to have sanctuary at home, whether you're Black, whether you're immigrant, whether you're trans, no matter where you're from. And we are not creating that. We are living into the same system of creating actual unaffordability, even when we do build affordable housing. So I just want to say that too, of like, just because someone says we're creating affordable housing, don't get rah-rah and too excited, because a lot of times that's still not affordable for most people living in Oakland. And it's definitely not affordable for people who actually are unhoused and need a place to live.
Yeah. Bringing in that human rights framework, because I think that that's really critical and important, right? That, you know, affordable housing isn't the only solution. It's a part of a solution for right now, but it can't be the fix it all, right? I'm curious from y'all's perspective, what are the other solutions, right? I mean, ultimately, we could talk all day about the problems. And I think we've given folks a really good understanding of, like, there's a pipeline, right, of being unhoused to being able to have stable housing, right? What are the ways we are fighting right now in your individual work, campaigns, so forth, to really get to stabilizing folks in housing in Oakland?
Well, I think part of it is just we as a society have to reshift our thinking around housing and decolonize it, basically. Get it out of the capitalist mindset of ownership being of a sole person, a sole entity, a corporation, because that's what's getting us what we have right now, right? So community ownership of spaces, I think, is really, really important. Like tapping into our indigenous roots, our indigenous communities, understanding of, multi-generational spaces that folks can have, right? Community spaces, right? Where folks can live within a grouping of people that collaboratively discusses and talks about what are some of the needs within that community and how do we build that housing within that community, right? There's the land trusts, making sure that the land trusts have dollars that they could buy property, rehab it, and then have those folks have the ownership of that property so that they can have a democratic process in which they select, what's going to happen next. Are we going to fix the roof or are we going to fix the plumbing? And those conversations can happen amongst tenants, and it doesn't have to be a top-down landlord-tenant relationship, right? So I think we have to be dreaming and thinking of those spaces and really pushing our electeds to think of social housing, and also make sure that it's green social housing. We can no longer use materials that we know are going to be deteriorating and causing health issues within our community. We can no longer create just concrete, housing, or even the even some of the modular housing, we have to have some greenery in there, some sort of way in which folks are connecting to the earth in those spaces, right? Because we know that studies have shown that if people see green, if people see vibrant colors, if people see murals and things like that, they're more connected to those spaces. It brings peace to those to folks in those spaces versus it just being, affordable housing, modular, just concrete space, just a roof over your head. I really think of, like, to me, it's like shelter is the survival mechanism, housing is the thriving mechanism, right? So how can we make sure that we are creating housing that is truly of our community versus how do we just shelter folks for the meantime as we figure out other solutions?
Yeah, I think absolutely. How do we prevent homelessness? I think that if we're not doing prevention of homelessness, we're not doing anything to deal with the housing problem. Absolutely, we need to create more housing, and it needs to be social housing. We need to be thinking about the decommodification of land. Honestly, in my opinion, food, land, and housing, because all of that is land for people to live on, land for people to grow food on.
Yep.
This is the opportunities to survive and thrive as a community. It's connected to land. And if we continue to keep it to be this capitalist plaything, this chess piece, then it will never matter whether people have it or not. It will be created so that people can make money, which is what's happening now. It's not created for people to have a place to live. It's created for investors to be able to make money. And until that changes, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to work ourselves out of this. But we do have to do the prevention of homelessness. We do have to build, I say, shelter, transitional housing, sustainable supportive housing, and long-term actual social housing that everybody can afford, where nobody in the city is paying more than a third of their income. And even knowing that, if you have a low income, even a third of your income still makes you more rent burdened than anybody else. And it's still not enough, but it's a step forward from where we are now.
Right. And I think that's one of the frustrations when we talk about affordable housing is what is affordable housing? What defines it? What is that number? Because it's different for everyone. It's different for if you're making minimum wage. It's even different for people making 6 figures, right? Because we live in the Bay Area. But one thing that we can all agree on is that everyone deserves housing.
Yes.
And it is a human right. And gentrification and displacement, not only does it deteriorate, our housing communities, but our teachers are displaced, right? Health workers are displaced. It breaks down the cultural community. We're losing our artists, movement people, and prioritizing housing for those communities keeps the city safe. It keeps the city clean. And it keeps our culture. And so in closing, just to get who else deserves, or not even deserves, but who else do we need to prioritize, or how can we prioritize housing for these particular communities, which is important as we're seeing schools shut down, and our healthcare workers not being able to live in the cities where they service people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think a couple groups that get left out, I think young people get left out of this conversation so much, right?
Thank you.
They're
Yes,
hearing, they hear all of the conversations that happen in the household. Let's be clear, right? And they are hearing how much their parents are rent burdened. They're hearing how much it's going to cost to have their first apartment, and they're shocked, right? I had the privilege to take 12 eighth graders to Sacramento this year from Urban Promise Academy. And their testimonials said more than I could have ever said, right? A 14-year-old talked about how they're going to have to get a summer job to help their parents with housing. This is a 14-year-old. They should be out doing whatever it is 14-year-olds do now, but they're having to take that burden on, right? Last year, we even had some high school students from Skyline come because they were like, we are going to go to college, but we don't know if we can come back to Oakland because we don't know if we can actually live here in Oakland. So it is something. So housing and housing issues are impacting our young people, and they need to be part of the conversation when it comes to this. Transitional age youth housing, right? Because there's so many folks that fall off that cliff as soon as they turn 18, have nowhere to go. Why not, as a community, hold those folks and have a space for them? The other group I would say is our seniors, right? A lot of those folks are on fixed incomes. And it seems like the Trump administration just wants to put them out on the street. And we cannot allow that to happen, right? So even if we have, a set amount of a percentage of their income going to housing, that income may be dropping drastically over the next few years. And so we need to have a clear plan as to how we are honoring our elders and making sure that they're staying in the community that they want to stay in, that they have lived in for the majority of their lives. And so I think those two groupings of folks really need to be a thoughtful part of the conversation when we're talking about housing, because it is how we're honoring them and also how we are building the future housing that our children will want to stay in Oakland, will want to come back to Oakland to live in.
Yeah. Our young folks don't even have an opportunity to think that they're going to be able to stay in Oakland and live here. And yet people come here to go to school, and then they have an opportunity to be able to come and stay here and actually gentrify neighborhoods and push out the families of those young people who weren't even able to stay where their families are. I think another, as you mentioned, workforce housing. We don't hear enough about that. Like, what if we weren't dependent only upon the government, which we know is not going to give us the housing that we need and deserve? What would it look like if unions were fighting for workforce housing for their employees so that everybody with a job actually had a place to live? Even that would be a huge, huge difference and make a significant change in this city right now.
Right. Well, I think those are amazing communities. I definitely would love my lovely oldest daughter, who is very much so in the transitional age youth category, to be out my pocketbook. I ain't gonna lie, I'm selfish on this issue. Look, and it's sad because I've watched her give all her time and energy to go to college and come back, and you look at jobs and like, dang, even if I get a job that matches with my degree, I'm not going to make enough to be able to live on their own. So I think it affects across generations. I think multi-generational housing, is amazing. I think the idea of social housing and also the spectrum of like, we need shelters for folks who are in immediate dire need of safe space, but we also need transitional housing for folks who are in the process of going through a number of issues and problems in our communities, particularly related to health, rehabilitation, drug use, so on and so forth. And then we also need to think about, right, how we've shifted this conversation to affordability versus actually the long-term issue, which is how are we getting out of the idea of capitalist-based models of housing, right? So really appreciate you all framing that for us. And I hope that we all think about that, right? Because I think the two dynamics that I've watched, particularly my generation and maybe the generation before me, the Gen X, I want to buy a house and I want to flip it. Right? That's the dominant narrative here in the Bay is I want to buy a house, I want to flip it, and I'm going to buy another house, I want to flip it. And the reality is that is a capitalist thinking process, right? And it actually does help gentrification. It continues to advance this idea that housing is not a human right, but rather a commodity that can be bought, sold, and that is harming our community. So I know we could talk more and on and on. Can't understand. Let me not stop. Y'all know I love a sing. But let's go on and wrap this episode up. You can take action on this issue by continuing to stay informed. There's so many ways that you can learn more about this issue. There's conversations actively happening at City Council. You can check out ACE. You can check out eBase. They're both really important organizations to support. But also, we're not talking about this issue just because we want folks to know about it. We want you to take action on it and to get involved in making sure that you play your role in ending displacement in our communities. So please continue to get involved. Please continue to fight with us all. And especially with our champions that are elected, our Nikki Bass on the County Board of Supervisors, as well as Carol Fife on City Council, who are really pushing these issues into the conversation around Oakland. So with that said,
Well, thank you to our guests
Thank you
for
having
joining
us.
us
Thank you so
today.
much for
Yes,
having
this
us.
was a really great, informative, conversation, and I hope folks take a lot from it. And thank you, the listeners, for tuning in to this episode of Town Politics. We hope that you learned something. We hope that you follow the work of our guests. And we hope that you share this episode with your family and friends if you're inspired. This podcast is hosted by Oakland Rising Action. To show your support for this kind of educational and political content, please follow the podcast page on YouTube, Spotify, and our IG broadcast channel to stay a part of the town conversation. Stay tuned for next month's episode. Politics for the people. What are progressives pushing now? Where will we be joined by Kimmy Lee from Bay Rising? And what do you think of the future of progressive politics should look like? Thank you for joining us.
I bet I'm cracking a smile. Pick it up when I'm putting it down. Listen up, I'ma say it aloud. It's town business, let's break that down. We showing up, serve game by the pound. Talk politics, it's going down. We politicking in the town, so you know it's